Man, the internet is all abuzz right now about this rumored 9950 X3D X2 CPU, which is technically rumored to be a dual CCD 3D V-Cache CPU coming out from AMD. We're gonna talk today about these rumors, what it possibly means, and why I kind of don't think it's actually gonna happen. I guess I'd be okay with being wrong on that one, but I have some thoughts on this, and I think there's too many trade-offs for the benefit.
So Jay likes boats.
USS Fletcher, torpedoes, and agility.
No. He really likes boats.
I'm the Bismarck, I shoot big guns. Oh no!
He really likes boats.
The IJN Yamato, the true fear in the Pacific.
And when he's not playing with his boats, he is building his boats.
Done.
And when he's not building those boats, he's playing with those boats. Online, in World of Warships.
This year marks 250 years of the United States Navy, and World of Warships is celebrating this incredible milestone with one of their biggest events ever, the US Navy 250th Anniversary Celebration. From now through the end of the year, you can build your very own Liberty Harbor, an interactive naval base packed with missions, history, and awesome rewards. Upgrade facilities, send ships on expeditions, and earn naval-based supplies to unlock epic prizes including the brand new Tier 8 Premium Cruiser Bridgeport. Free by just playing. New to the game? Well, use invite code STEPUP250 when you sign up on PC to instantly get 20 days of premium account time, the US Tier 3 Cruiser St. Louis, a port slot, and a commander. Plus access to missions that can score you the US Tier 7 Cruiser Boise, 7 super containers, and 40 million credits and more. And for returning players, rejoin the fight and claim special rewards available only during this event. Tackle Liberty Harbor missions to collect valuable items and dive back in with fresh ships and content. So whether you're a new recruit or a seasoned commander, set sail today to celebrate 250 years of naval power in World of Warships.
Join the fight and build your legacy at worldofwarships.com.
So yeah, he really likes boats.
Yeah.
So AMD has been doing chiplet design now ever since 2016 when they came out with the very first Ryzen, the Zen 1 architecture. Now each chiplet is basically 4 cores and 8 threads, or up to 4 cores and 8 threads. You can have a 6-core 12 thread, you can have some shaved down versions of it. However, they've done this more of a tiled design, or they call chiplets, which is basically having these core chips that then connect to each other through what's called an infinity fabric, how they can kind of communicate as one CPU, but technically when it comes to the substrate, there are multiple small CPUs. Now I've got a few different CPUs right here in front of me. I've got like a single CCD, which is just what is this one here? This is a 5800 X3D. So that's a single CCD with 8 cores and 16 threads of 3D V-Cache for AM4. And then I've got right here I forget which one I grabbed right here. This is a 9800 X3D, which is just the Zen 4 architecture, Zen 5. Zen 5 architecture of basically the same thing. And then I've got a big old Threadripper right here, which is essentially 4 of these guys put together on there, but without the 3D V-Cache. They're just frequency cores, which are designed to go as fast as they possibly can. But again, they're all the same design, with the exception of the the AM4 one though, and they've just scaled up how many of those chiplets they'll put on the substrate, making a very scalable design. And that's where initially we all kind of looked at that and went, man, this sort of sucks. The growing pains were there. The cross latency between the CCDs and the early Infinity Fabric designs were not great. It was funny because one of the most iconic quotes from Intel back then is, yeah, we'll just go ahead and adopt a wait and see mentality to see how the consumers sort of respond to the glued together CPUs. This is what Intel called it. Fast forward to Core Ultra, which is exactly what they're doing now, which is a tiled design. It's just they're not chiplets, it's more tiled where they can kind of plug and play different core designs and IO cores and whatnot on a single substrate. So they've definitely waited too long to see, in my opinion, for them to sort of catch up. But kind of a side discussion here real quick. Core Ultra sort of sucks because it's the first time Intel has really kind of done this sort of architecture, and it's gonna take time for it to be refined. If you go back to when Zen 1 was out, it was so much better than what FX had to offer, but it was still quite a ways behind what Intel was offering at the time. Obviously, it has aged like fine wine, and Ryzen is now the dominant CPU when it comes to gamers and multitaskers and just general users these days because of the brand trust and the amount of effort that AMD's put into this architecture now going on 10 years. We've just seen all of those efforts really pay off and pay dividends for AMD now. And Intel's now kind of doing the same thing, but it's going to take time before we see any of those improvements. I think whatever the next generation Core Ultra is going to look like will probably be better, but Intel has bigger problems than their gaming CPUs right now. But anyway, moving on and digressing back to the discussion here about the rumored 9950 X3D2 or X2, whatever you want to call it. Right now, the current 9900 X3D, 9950 X3D, 7900 X3D, and 7950 X3D are asymmetrical designs. What that means is you've got one CCD that has the 96 megabytes of L3 cache available for the X3D CCD, and then you've got the frequency CCD, which has less cache on it. I forget the exact amount, but has less cache on it, but a higher core frequency. Now, what we've seen from Zen 5 versus Zen 4 is a significant bump to the frequency for even the CCD with the 3D V-Cache, because they inverted the design, where the core was under the cache before, which meant that there was almost like an insulating blanket on top of the core, so heat transfer from the core to the IHS to remove heat from the core was slow and inefficient because it had to travel through the cache. So AMD flipped that design now, where now the cache is under the core, on top of the substrate, and the core is making direct contact with the IHS, which has allowed for better cooling, which has allowed for them to lift the TJ Max up to 95C, which means now they can lift the frequency up with that as well. So we've already seen a huge generational uplift in performance simply from the slightly better Zen 5 architecture and IPC, but also having more cycles, right, by being able to up the frequency. Now that brought the frequency much, much closer to what the frequency cache looks like. So now you have a CCD that's designed for like gaming, which is an 8-core 16-thread, and you have a CCD that's designed for more multitasking or background tasks while you're gaming, which is a frequency priority CCD. Now let's talk about some of the trade-offs here. One of the reasons why you still want to park the cores, even on a 9950X and 9900X, is because of cross-CCD latency. Although the Infinity Fabric design and the interconnect has gotten much, much faster, much more efficient, and has a lot less interconnect latency between the two, it's still there. It is still gonna have more latency than any standard CPU that does not have to hand off any sort of task to another CCD. And especially considering they're asymmetrical, and if you hand off the game process to the non-3D V-Cache CCD, it's gonna have a lot less cache available to it, so it's gonna be this constant dynamic change. So that's why the whole 3D V-Cache optimizer driver exists. That's why things like process lasso exists and CPU set setter exists, so that you can make sure that your games stay where they are supposed to stay, which is the cache available to it. Now, this is why I don't personally believe that a 9950 X3D2 makes a lot of sense. Now, AMD might do it just because they can. AMD is starting to feel a lot like Dodge, if you will, where they just they'll put a Hellcat engine in anything, including a Chrysler Pacifica, because they can, and they have enough of them. Why the fuck not, right? So AMD really feels a lot like Dodge in the fact that they're being youthful and they're just like, let's just do things because we can right now. And the CPU side is so dominant for AMD. I don't think it is surprising that they might come out with this, but I don't think it makes sense, and let me explain why. Regardless of whether or not you have a symmetrical CCD design with up to 192 megabytes of L3 cache, which would be combined between the two, it'd still be 96, I think it's 96 megabytes per cache. Remember, these are rumored. There's a uplift in heat as well, because they're gonna be lifting it from 180 watts to 200 watts based on these rumors anyway. But the fact is you still are going to have the latency between the CCDs. See, one of the reasons why you want, like I said, you want to chop the CCDs and separate them during gaming and have them operate basically like two independent processors, because they kind of are, even though they're accessing the same set of RAM, is because you eliminate that cross CCD latency entirely. That's why for gaming mode for Threadripper, you shut down like 75% of the CPU when you do that, because imagine having 4 CCDs that can be bouncing around and sharing that task. You have exponentially more potential cross latency between the CCDs. So if you turn on gaming mode on Threadripper, it's like going from a ridiculous amount of cores, like 64 cores, down to 16. Right? It's crazy because of the fact that they know that it makes sense to keep the game on one CCD. That's why buying a Threadripper for a gamer makes absolutely no sense at all. And that's the same reason why I believe the 9950 X3D X2 makes no sense because you're reintroducing that potential cross latency between the two. Now, although it's improved, I think if you were to take a standard 9800 X3D at the same frequency compared to a 9950 X3D X2 and have it fully enabled where you're not parking a core or a CCD, I still believe the 9800 X3D would edge out the 9950 X3D too, because of the fact that it simply doesn't have that handoff issue and latency. Remember, each CCD has to have its access to the RAM as well. So you're kind of splitting your system in half essentially, and there's no reason to do that. So I still think the 9950 X3D makes the perfect sense for somebody that is using the system as more of a gaming system as well as a multitasking system for work or home office or even like an office here. I think it makes the most sense because it's essentially like having two processors that are capable of doing their tasks better than the other CCD can. So you have both, right? You have your gaming CCD and you have your multitasking one. And don't get me wrong, the 3D V-Cache CCD is still extremely capable. For instance, I'm running a 9950 X3D at home by simply clicking PBO and doing a slight offset on the, I think I'm at -20 on the offset for the voltage. It runs, I get 46,000 points, plus or minus about 500 points, in Cinebench R23, where my overclocked 14900K on water was barely able to scrape past 41 to maybe 42. Now, a 9950 X3D is able to get approximately the same score when it comes to something like Cinebench 23. Now, Cinebench R23, that's just an AVX instruction set test. It's only one test, but the point is, if you're comparing those two, Intel, which was always dominant over AMD when it came to AVX, that hurdle has been passed, it has been jumped, it has been cleared by AMD, and my 9950 X3D is just shitting all over my 14900K when I had that CPU system. So I definitely feel like I have the best of both worlds. I've been playing a lot of Battlefield 6, I've been playing a lot of games at home now that I brought my system at home. I've actually probably gamed more in the last week since I brought it home than I have in the whole first 10 months of this year. I'm not gonna lie. But that's because my 14900K in Skunkworks was degrading, and so I was getting tired of blue screens and random things and having to go in there and tune it constantly. Now I'm able to just play and have no problems whatsoever. So I don't see the benefit of taking a more expensive CCD, which the 3D V-Cache is expensive to produce. So I don't think it makes sense to double it up on a CPU. I can't fathom a scenario where that makes sense. I think having the asymmetrical design makes the most sense. If anything, maybe process improvements to get the core clocks even higher would be the best thing to do. But I mean, my 7950 X3D, when I had that, my X3D CCD was running about 4.8 gigahertz all core on that CCD when running something like Cinebench. And then the frequency core was running like 5.1 to 5.2. What I'm noticing now with PBO, and that's PBO enabled by the way on the 7950 X3D, but it was extremely limited by temperature. It was very temperature sensitive. It had like an 85C TJ Max. So it had lower headroom on everything. Power was 180 watts, but the temperature headroom was lower. But on my 9950 X3D today with PBO enabled, I'm getting about 5051 on the X3D die, or CCD, and then on the frequency CCD, I'm getting like 5253. There's a very little difference between the two now. AMD's really got those very close together. So I'm having a hard time imagining a scenario where it makes sense to increase the cost to create this CPU for what I believe would be no gain. Now, what I would love to see, and I don't think we're gonna see this, is we've seen AMD cut them down, right? We've seen AMD cut down into smaller portions. So in the same sets of leaks of like this whole 9950 X3D2 thing, they're also reporting a leak of the 7500 X3D, which would be a 6-core, 12-thread part with X3D. Now we've seen that. We've seen the 7600 X3D, right, which is already a very solid gaming CPU. We've seen them continue to come out with X3D parts for AM4, still supporting AM4, which is awesome. But if you look at the CPU set setter video that we did and we were in Battlefield 6, because I could turn off a single thread at a time using that tool, awesome tool by the way, if you haven't seen that video, go and watch it. It was developed by a viewer of ours and it's just a fun utility to go around. If you really wanna know where the sweet spot is on how many cores your game is truly using, it wasn't until we dropped down below 6 cores, 12 threads in Battlefield 6 that we saw any sort of a FPS drop. So 6-core 12-thread I still think is the amazing sweet spot. I would love to see a CCD with more cores on it instead of the 8-core 16-thread max CCD design. What if they were able to somehow yield a 16-core 32-thread single CCD with X3D? No infinity fabric, no latency there, just a bigger CCD with more cache on there. And then you would have 192 megabytes of L3 cache available to all of those cores. Then you'd see, I think, an amazing potential uplift in performance. And again, that latency is then gone. But I think the yield, even if we're talking non-X3D cores and tile design and CCD design, I think the yield is just too difficult. So I think that's why they've stuck to the 8-core 16-thread, because that seems to be the sweet spot, that and below, in terms of the yield on manufacturing. Because there's an incredible amount of waste when it comes to the overall wafer design. Even when you start to cut down, like let's say you take an 8-core 16-thread CCD, a couple of the cores are faulty, so what they do is they basically fuse off the unused cores within the CCD. Now you got your 6-core part, now you got your 4-core part. But that wafer was still utilized even though it's fused off. So there's an incredible amount of waste. So I'm wondering what the yields would look like to truly create a 16-core, 32-thread single CCD part. That would get me excited right there. That'd be like obviously twice the size of a 9800 X3D, significantly more L3 cache, and I think that would just be insane to see. Then you can see Threadrippers with 2 of those instead of 4, you know, and then Threadripper could become a potentially gaming part, but Threadripper's never intended to be a gaming part. But I'll tell you this though, when it comes to all these hypotheticals and stuff, one of the ways that I like to get really intimate with a product and try and give you guys real insight on how the product does or doesn't work or some of its nuances is I'll usually build a system and then run it and test it for quite a while. So for instance, I've been running a 9950X non-3D in my workstation upstairs, which does an equal amount of work versus an equal amount of gaming. And it's been really solid. I'll be honest, I cannot tell the difference between my 9950X 3D at home and my 9950X here at work. And I think honestly, the resolutions that I play at is one of the reasons why. I run at home a 3860 by 1600. So it's 4K wide, 1600 tall, ultra wide. And then upstairs here, I'm running a 3440 by 1400, which is a standard WQHD panel. So at those resolutions, with the settings maxed out, I'm just not hitting the CPU hard enough to truly see a difference, which really made me start to think, I kind of feel like I missed an opportunity at home to run Core Ultra. Why? Because I'm truly wondering if you'd be able to notice at the higher resolutions with the higher end graphics card, a difference between something like even a Core Ultra and a 9950X 3D at high resolution gaming with a 5090 without an FPS meter present. That's the thing, as long as you can't see the numbers, oftentimes you can't tell the difference. So I feel like I missed an opportunity to just run it at home and see whether or not it's truly as bad as people say. Now the charts on certain titles definitely show the lacking of Core Ultra. But maybe I'll reserve that test and that long-term test for Core Ultra 2, whatever they're gonna call it, like the next version, which is rumored to be coming out somewhat soon. But now you've got to wonder, with Intel's future looking so strange, with them now being a partner with NVIDIA. Now, NVIDIA's share, like what NVIDIA purchases is very, very minority. They don't have any say, honestly, in the way the company runs. It's just NVIDIA has obviously showed a vested interest in Intel staying alive, probably for AI reasons, as we've seen. Even the US government has given money to Intel, so now it's really weird. Who knows what the future truly looks like. Now that you have this bailout money involved, I think you're a lot less, like you're not gonna see Intel coming out with crazy things like AMD is, because now there's too many cooks in the kitchen on that one. And AMD right now is just kind of, well, they're writing their own checks at this point because they're just dominating on the CPU side. But I've seen so many people talk about these rumors. I just don't personally feel like a 9950X 3D2 makes a whole lot of sense. I think it's still the best of both worlds to have a frequency CCD and a cache CCD. But maybe I'm off base. Go ahead and, I guess, debate down in the comments below if you can see the benefit. If you do see the benefit, explain where that benefit lies. Because I think, once again, the whole point of running a single CCD for games is to get rid of cross latency. Just because you have a whole bunch of cache on the other one doesn't get rid of that latency. All right, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. That has the high amount of 96 gigabytes. Wow, holy shit, 96 megabytes. 96. That's next year's CPU, guys. 96 gigs of cache. The CPU will be that big. Anyway.